Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie, and in this video I want to look at the weekend of July the 11th and 12th 2026. So in this video I'm going to start off by looking at the overall astrological picture, things that are going on over the weekend, which I regard as being of importance, and then I want to focus on what I think is probably the main event, the main aspect of the weekend, which is the semisquare between the Sun and Uranus. So this takes place on Saturday, and I think that this aspect could be quite dramatic, especially as it comes at the same time as the moon is making a conjunction to Uranus and a conjunction to Mars. So this could all be quite important, and it could impact all of the 12 signs. But it is a weekend when the emphasis is very much on Saturday. Saturday, that's when all the action takes place. On Sunday, I think things are perhaps easier going, as you'll see as you watch the first part of a video. So let's start off by looking at the overall chart. Here it is. I've set this chart for midnight on Sunday, Sunday, July the 12th, 2026 at New York. Now, I have noticed, by the way, that in the comments there have been questions about why do I set these charts for New York? Why wouldn't it make more sense to set these charts for Greenwich Mean Time, or maybe British summertime? Yeah, I do understand that argument, and I'm not saying I'm not saying I'm right, and I'm not saying I won't make a change. But I'd certainly be interested in any sort of comments. My rationale for choosing New York is that I do look at how many people are watching my videos, and roughly 50% of my viewers come from the Americas. 50% coming from the rest of the world. I don't know, maybe 15%, 20% coming from Europe, and I just thought that New York was a kind of a happy compromise, given the fact that 50% of my viewers are in the Americas. So okay, I could go for London. If I went for London, then that would mean that I'd be 8 hours out from a Californian perspective. So that's why I've gone for New York. When there's no particular reason why I've gone for New York. I could have gone. I could go for London. Maybe I should go for London, but I would be certainly interested in your comments, particularly if you're in the Americas. So if you're in the Americas, is that a problem if I set things from London, from the perspective of London? I don't think it actually makes a huge amount of difference. I mean, London is only 5 hours out from New York, so in 5 hours the moon only moves a couple of degrees. So I don't think that it is such a big deal. But anyway, I would be interested in your views about time zones. Anyway, getting back to this chart. So the moon is in Gemini at the middle of the weekend. So there it is. The moon is at sort of 18 degrees Gemini. So really, for the whole weekend, pretty much, the moon is moving through this sign, certainly from a Eurasian perspective. And if you're in the Americas, late afternoon, early evening on Sunday, there is a sign change. The moon moves from Gemini into Cancer, and of course, when the moon moves into Cancer, that is a build up to a new moon, because we've got a new moon on Tuesday, on the 14th. Important day for France. That's on Bastille Day. So that's something that we certainly need to discuss. Now, as far as the emphasis is concerned this weekend, it does really seem that Saturday is a much more sort of busy weekend, it's busy day than Sunday, because on Saturday the moon is making a conjunction to Uranus and a conjunction to Mars. And so we had a Mars-Uranus conjunction about a week ago, and I talked about Mars-Uranus conjunction. I suggested it might be quite dramatic. In a way, I think it has been dramatic, because in the days following the Mars-Uranus conjunction, of course, we had this sort of flare-up in the Gulf, the United States hitting all those targets in Iran, and Iran fighting back or retaliating. And, of course, that's had an impact on the markets. It's had an impact on the oil price. And in particular parts of the world, there have been things going on. I mean, for example, in the UK, you've had Nigel Farage resigning as a member of Parliament in order to re-stand. We've had word of Marine Le Pen announcing she's going to stand for president next year, even though she's having to wear an ankle bracelet. I mean, I am hoping to talk about Nigel Farage and Marine Le Pen very soon. I think I'm going to try on Saturday morning certainly to release a video about Nigel Farage, because there's a lot going on in Nigel Farage's chart, and I think a lot of people in the UK are sort of wondering whether his political career is coming to an end or not, and I certainly have a view on that matter. But anyway, it did seem that the Mars-Uranus conjunction is separating, and now Mars and Uranus are over 5 degrees apart, but what has happened is that the moon has come along, and the moon has rekindled the whole thing, and you might see it as being like a fire. So the Mars-Uranus conjunction was a fire. We had the fire, and it seemed that the fire had gone out. And now what's happening is that the moon, when it makes a conjunction to Mars and Uranus, it's kind of bringing it all together. So the fire might be rekindled. And of course, this is in Gemini. So the moon, might be like the wind. It sort of hits the smouldering embers, and the whole thing bursts into flames and all over again. And so that may say something about Saturday. It might be about what's going on in the world, but it might also be about just general irritation, things that really might be quite annoying. So that is perhaps the main aspect of the day of the weekend, the fact that you've got moon, not just conjunct Uranus, conjunct Mars, but on the Mars-Uranus midpoint, people could get annoyed, and we might get annoyed. And additionally, if you're talking about Mars and Uranus, it's an aspect that is quite sort of accident prone, and so if we push things too far, if we're not paying attention to what we're doing, well, yeah, something could go wrong. We could trip up, but it is a fast-moving aspect. The moon moves quickly through those conjunctions, and then it moves on. And by Sunday, I think that all things being equal, things should be calming down. Now, another aspect that is interesting is a semisextile between Venus and Jupiter. And I will refer to this Venus-Jupiter semisextile when I look at the horoscopes of some of the 12 signs. And so Jupiter is in Leo, Venus is in Virgo. And so you've got the two benefics here, 30 degrees apart. And the 30-degree aspect is potentially quite tense. I mean, it's not like a square or an opposition, but there's just a certain incompatibility between Venus and Jupiter. And one way of looking at it is to say that, Jupiter, the greater benefic, is about the big picture. It's about expanding things further, seeing everything that is possible, not limiting ourselves, particularly as Jupiter is in Leo, Jupiter in a fire sign. But then it has to deal with Venus in Virgo, Venus fallen in Virgo. So the lesser benefic is not necessarily in such a good position. And perhaps part of a problem with Venus in Virgo might be that it focuses too much on annoying material details that Jupiter doesn't really want to have to bother with. Jupiter's trying to see the big picture, and Venus in Virgo is just looking at, I don't know, something like money or how much things cost or some other detail. Yeah, but it's not right. That's... you have a big idea and that's really annoying, and someone says, yeah, but you've forgotten this, and there's this little detail that you've forgotten, and because you've forgotten that whole detail, your whole idea, just doesn't happen. You're never able to wheel anything out. The big concept, never happens. It's like you write this great essay and you're really pleased with this essay, or this... you've written an article for something and someone just comments on the spelling. You made a typo here, and you just meant it as a first draft. Here's his first draft. What do you think? And then someone says, well, you've missed out a comma here and you've misspelt that and you've repeated this, and this is not what you want to hear. And so that could be how Venus, the Venus-Jupiter semisextile works. Something annoying, but it's not like Venus in Virgo should be regarded as a villain here. Maybe Venus in Virgo has got a point. It's all very well having big ideas, but they have to relate to the real world. And so Venus in Virgo might be a gentle reminder. You've got to look at, you've got to think about what things look like. Sure, it's completely trivial what things look like, but it can matter. Unfortunately, style should, style, me, I find I don't understand the concept of style. Maybe that's why my life is such a disaster, because I don't understand style. But yeah, it does matter. And so that's perhaps what Venus is saying. Yeah, surface appearances matter. And even if they shouldn't matter, they do matter. And so maybe that is a way in which we can sort of utilize that Venus semisextile Jupiter. We've got to have the big ideas. They're important. And Venus in Virgo shouldn't try to just cut these big ideas to pieces. But at the same time, big ideas without some awareness of what things look like, well, that's also important. And I want to look at the Sun semisquare Uranus, but just first, let's just look at the chart from the viewpoint of Sydney, Australia. So if you are in Australia or New Zealand, you will see that at midnight, the moon is making a conjunction to Mars. So, I said, with reference to the New York chart, that the Moon Mars Uranus conjunction is very much at the beginning of the weekend. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, I think that, or East Asia, that Moon Mars conjunction is getting stronger throughout Saturday, and theoretically it reaches a peak around midnight, give or take a few hours. And so Saturday, not just Saturday morning, but throughout Saturday and maybe into Sunday a little, you will feel perhaps the irritation of that Moon Mars Uranus conjunction. So, be careful throughout Saturday, including a Saturday evening. I don't know if you're going to a party or something on Saturday night. Yeah, be extra careful. But still, by Sunday, by daylight on dawn on Sunday, I think that things should be calming down. And then there is the heliocentric picture. Here it is. Venus and Mars are still in opposition to one another. This heliocentric opposition has really been going on and on, and there's always that tension, which perhaps was reflected by what I was saying about the Mars-Uranus conjunction. So some people just do find it difficult to get on with one another, and okay, it's not as bad as it was a few days ago. But you just shouldn't naturally assume that everyone's going to relate to one another. Different people have different views. They have different agendas, and yes, they may clash. You'll also see that the Earth and Mercury are making a conjunction, and that tells us something that we already know. So if you look at the geocentric chart, you can see that the Sun and Mercury are coming together, and so the heliocentric chart is just telling us what we already know. Earth, Mercury coming together, but I kind of like it when we see things in terms of the Earth conjunct Mercury. There is a lot to say. There's a lot to be said. People are trying to communicate something, and they're trying to communicate something perhaps with a degree of urgency. And now I just want to quickly look at the Sun-Uranus semisquare. Now you might say that the Sun-Uranus semisquare is the big aspect of the week. Sorry, not of the week, of the weekend. And so it takes place London time 12:49 p.m. on Saturday. But I think it's a feature really of all of Saturday. And so there is the Sun at 19 degrees 12 Cancer, and there is Uranus at 4 degrees 12 Gemini, so making an exact 45 degree aspect. And so it kind of sort of emphasizes what we already knew. When we looked at this Sun Mars Uranus conjunction. So Sun Mars Uranus conjunction, I did take the view that was a pretty unstable configuration, and so when the Sun is exactly semisquare Uranus, the Moon is exactly conjunct Mars. And so there may be a moment on Saturday, or a window on Saturday, where things really could be quite crazy, when people could do things which are really unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen next, and so we have to sort of watch our own behavior and make sure we don't take things too far, make sure we don't exaggerate. And additionally, this may say something about the world at large. It may just say something going on in one of the trouble spots, or perhaps a sort of a new trouble spot. I don't know. I'll look at the astrocartography very quickly. As you know, I do use astrocartography, but I must emphasize that astrocartography is a really hit and miss technique. It really doesn't always work. So let's just do an astromap to see if there's anything that we should be looking at. I haven't actually done an astromap before. So the Sun. At the exact moment of this Sun-Uranus semisquare, the Sun is on the midheaven, going through Holland, eastern France, and Algeria. This may be a potential trouble spot. So yeah, eastern France, the Benelux countries. Southern France, and in terms of Africa, sort of Algeria and below. So that might be a part of the world that one perhaps should be thinking about. I mean, so far so good with France. You were kind of, because there was just news that France had defeated Morocco in in the World Cup. I don't think there was anything serious going on in France. I think there was some riots in London because Morocco had lost. I'm not quite sure why. I wasn't really sort of following that story. So that's a part of a world that comes to mind. I mean, as far as the United States is concerned, there is the sun line. The Americas, all the places where the sun is on the ascendant, sort of goes through Texas. I'm not quite sure if that's how relevant that is. So yeah, there are a few. There are a few places to consider, but I mean, I don't want to put a huge amount of emphasis on that. Okay, we've got a Uranus on the midheaven line going through eastern Brazil. But I would have said probably, but if we want to look at anywhere, I would have said sort of eastern France and Benelux to be affected by this Sun semi-square Uranus. But I wouldn't necessarily read too much into it. And I did want to look at one famous person. Well, it may be a famous person that one hasn't necessarily heard of, but I don't know whether you've been following what's going on in Peru. Peru has a new president, and Peru's new president is Keiko Fujimori. So she is the daughter of Alberto Fujimori, and so Alberto Fujimori was he was president of Peru. I think Peru. He went into prison. He went to prison, I think, for corruption, and he was sort of quite hardline. He was kind of famous for taking on the the Sandinero Luminoso, which is a sort of a left-wing, sort of I think fairly Maoist guerrilla army in Peru. But anyway, she's just won the presidential election, and she has got her sun at 3 degrees 59 Gemini. So Uranus is exactly on Keiko Fujimori's sun, and so therefore the sun itself is going to be semi-square her sun. So this sun semi-square Uranus could have a big impact on Keiko Fujimori. I mean, she's already in the news. She's not president yet. I mean, she's not president until the end of the month. I think she becomes president sometime on July the 28th. And so as far as what Keiko Fujimori is experiencing at the time she becomes president, she's got Libra rising. So Saturn is going retrograde on her descendant as she becomes president. Uranus will, of course, go retrograde at some stage, and it will go back onto her sun, and Mercury is pretty close to her Jupiter. Mercury will be direct by then. But the fact that Saturn is on her ascendant and conjunct her Saturn is conjunct her descendant and conjunct her Jupiter, because she's got Jupiter setting in her chart. So perhaps Jupiter setting, she gets. Perhaps she's been quite fortunate in terms of support from other people, having Jupiter in Aries on a descendant. But the fact that at the time of swearing in, she's got Saturn on her descendant, Saturn conjunct her Jupiter, and she's got Uranus on her sun. Okay, that may say something about the day of her swearing in, but it might also say something about her presidency. So when Keiko Fujimori becomes president, we should perhaps be looking at what's going on in Peru, because it may not be entirely stable. So now I want to turn to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of July the 11th and 12th, 2026. Aries. It could be quite an action-packed weekend, particularly on Saturday. We've got the moon moving through Gemini. And, Gemini is a good sign for the moon to be moving through from an Aries perspective. It's in an air sign, and, Gemini and Aries are two signs that, relate to each other, quite well. And, it is perhaps, all about you being able to, express yourself. And, there are certainly things that you do want to say. And perhaps you haven't made your message clear, and perhaps you have a chance to really go over it, one more time, just in case people haven't really understood. And so you can certainly be in the thick of things, especially on a sort of a mental level. I'm not saying it's so much about physical action, but certainly you're able to give as good as you can get, and if you get involved in any kind of verbal altercation, I think that you can be quite effective. And one thing that is happening over the weekend, particularly at the beginning of a weekend, I think most of the action is on Saturday, is that the moon is rekindling Mars and Uranus. So there was a Mars-Uranus conjunction really some time ago. I think it was a week ago. And the Mars-Uranus conjunction, if you remember from my descriptions, is quite an energetic combination. In fact, quite explosive. You put Mars and Uranus together, well, anything can happen, like big bangs. And it can certainly be disruptive. And now that Mars is moving away from that conjunction to Uranus, you might kind of see it as a fire, where the flames have gone out, and maybe you can just leave it to just go out of its own accord. But then the moon comes along and makes a conjunction to Mars, a conjunction to Uranus, on Saturday. Okay, it might be early on Saturday. It does depend on your time zone, but the moon comes along and it sort of rekindles the whole thing. Maybe the moon's mere presence in Gemini, regardless of aspects in the same sign as Mars and Uranus, is just rekindling the flames. And so it could be, Aries, that something you thought had gone out suddenly bursts into life, maybe even bursts into flames. I don't mean that literally. So if you want to revisit an old situation, then I think you certainly can. And if you want to stir things up, you have the opportunity. Perhaps it is a sort of a good time to finish off an argument if you're in the mood for that. But I think that you have to be a little careful. Do you want to have an argument just for the sake of an argument? You don't want a sort of a Monty Python-esque situation where you pay for an argument and you get as much arguing as you paid for. But for what purpose? And I think that it's possible that some Arians are going to feel that something is a bit stuck, and that may be part of the problem. You may think that something just hasn't been fully resolved, and you can't do everything you would like to do, and it can be frustrating. It may be that we've got these planets in Gemini. Gemini is an air sign. It is about words, and it's not about action. And so some Arians may feel just ever so slightly frustrated that things should be moving. You're looking for a breakthrough, but that breakthrough just isn't happening. And it just might feel that you have to take things to the next level, whatever that next level might be. Something needs to be smashed. It's not going to bend. It will only break. And the question is, how far do you want to force things? And perhaps, Aries, you need to accept that, you can't do everything. Mercury's retrograde. Okay, Mercury's retrograde for everyone. And, it's not going to be retrograde forever. In a couple of weeks' time, it will go direct. But, while Mercury is retrograde, you may feel that you need to just, calm down a bit. Certain things may just have to remain stuck, for a bit longer. But Aries, we can't take away from the fact that the Moon is making that conjunction to Uranus and Mars, and that simple conjunction, Moon conjunct Mars, and that is taking place at the same time as the Sun is making a semisquare to Uranus. And, that has an effect on you. The Sun is, in a way, linked with Aries. Don't forget the Sun is exalted in Aries. And so if the Sun is semi-square Uranus, that's just more petrol, more gasoline on the fire. And so Aries, I think it's important that you don't exaggerate. And you recognise that there are limits to what you can accomplish, and it goes without saying, Aries, that you shouldn't take on too much, and you shouldn't do anything that is directly dangerous. And you'll have your moment. I mean, Jupiter is now in Leo. Jupiter is in a fire sign. Jupiter is in a fortunate part of your chart, so things are working slowly, but I just think some patience may be useful. Now, as the weekend progresses, I do think that things do start to calm down. As the Moon moves through Gemini, it makes these dramatic aspects, particularly that conjunction to Mars and Uranus, but as you move from Saturday into Sunday, I think that there is less going on, and I think that's a good thing. I mean, it can all be just a little bit too much, and you have a chance to think, and you don't have to be always the person in control, and it's not up to you to make things happen. And then eventually the Moon moves out of Gemini and moves into Cancer. So that movement into Cancer, London time, it takes place very late on Sunday, and I think sort of 14 minutes before midnight on Monday. So that's really right at the end of the weekend. If you're in the Americas, then that would be sort of maybe in the Sunday afternoon, and that perhaps tells you something about where things are going. Moon moving into Cancer, Aries. I think that things will, to an extent, calm down, and as you move into next week, the drama might be over, and you might sort of have a chance to reflect. Taurus. There is a lot of activity in Gemini this weekend. The Moon is making a conjunction to Uranus, a conjunction to Mars, and Gemini, in the Taurus chart, is often connected with finances, and what you have, what you don't have. And so there is a possibility, Taurus, that when it comes to money, you get annoyed, or rather you get annoyed if the subject of money starts to crop up. Or maybe it's not you getting annoyed, maybe it's someone else getting annoyed. Someone has got something to say about money. Maybe someone feels that they have to, look after their own sort of financial interests in a way that might be rather crude. And the question is, do you want to get involved? I mean, you could get involved. Venus has gone into Virgo quite recently. Venus is still making a conjunction to the South Node. And so as Venus is still conjunct the South Node in Virgo, in an Earth sign, there is just a possibility, Taurus, that you kind of get drawn into a material trap. And by a material trap, I mean a situation where you find yourself obsessing about money, regarding money as being like super important. But, is it? And, if you get annoyed about money, if you feel that money is something that, you need to analyze and discuss and get worried about, worked up about, I'm not sure if that's particularly healthy. I think, if possible, you should distance yourself from financial concerns, and it's probably not a time to be reaching any agreements or reaching any decisions, because there is just this feeling of overall aggravation. And right at the beginning of a weekend, we've got the moon making a square to Venus. In fact, Venus in Virgo is starting to make a square to Uranus. I think that square to Uranus is not exact until the beginning of the week. But, Venus, your ruler, square Uranus, starting to make a square to Uranus. Yeah, it's quite possible that something of a material nature sort of upsets your equilibrium, or is starting to upset your equilibrium. And you have to be very careful how you respond. And it might well be, Taurus, that something that seems to be important on the surface is actually really pretty trivial. So don't get overexcited about things of a material nature, because if you are able to get some perspective, I think that you will eventually realize that it's all actually quite trivial. And additionally, Taurus, we have a rather interesting aspect on Sunday between Venus and Jupiter. So Venus has of course gone into Virgo, and it makes a semi-sextile with Jupiter in Leo. I think that this aspect could be quite important, not necessarily because of any events, but because of priorities. So Venus, it's a mixed picture with Venus. As I've described in my last couple of videos, Venus is in Virgo. It's in an Earth sign. It's in a sign that Virgo has a good relationship with Taurus, but it is fallen. And as I've kind of already suggested, Venus can get or rather you can get your priorities wrong because Venus is in Virgo. You can perhaps look at things on a superficial level and not really look at the broader ethical and maybe emotional picture as well, and not look up. The idea is to look up, see what is possible, not to look down into the past. But I think that you might. So Venus in Virgo may be focusing on trivialities or on sort of material stuff which is just perhaps inappropriate, is at odds with Jupiter, because Jupiter is in Leo. Jupiter represents something broader, something wider, something that you really need to tune into. I mean, it's about the big picture, and you might spend so much time focusing on something quite small that you do miss the big picture. And it's the thing that is important to you, the thing that is really important. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that important thing is because, I don't know. I mean, every Taurus is different. I mean, I'm a Taurus. I've got my ascendant in Taurus. My sun is in Gemini, but it does apply to me. But I think there is a priority issue, and so if you find yourself putting a lot of effort into one thing in an almost quite sort of obsessive way, ask yourself, are you really doing it right? It's just possible that you can't see the wood for the trees, and so. Yeah, do get your priorities right, and there could be something of real value. Could be anything. Okay, it might be connected with your home, your family, your roots, your past. That's possible, but something of real value that you're missing, and it's not fated. I think that if you're just aware of yourself, I mean, there's no reason why you can't be self-aware. I think that you'll be able to pull back from this sort of overemphasis on triviality, and work out that there is something else, something grander, something more important that needs your attention. Gemini. A lot of emphasis on the sign Gemini this weekend. I mean, for most of the weekend, the moon is moving through Gemini, moving through your sign. I mean, the moon does leave Gemini, it leaves Gemini right at the end of Sunday. And if you're in London, that's 11:46 p.m., 14 minutes before midnight. If you're in the Americas, late afternoon, very early evening, the moon will be leaving Gemini and moving into Cancer. So you get the picture for most of the weekend. We have the moon in Gemini, and that's good, isn't it? I mean, you're a Gemini, and so when you've got the moon in Gemini, you're at least feeling at home. The energies around you are kind of in accord with who you are. But the moon, while it's in Gemini, it does make a lot of aspects, particularly on Saturday. And the moon, it makes a conjunction to Uranus, makes a trine to Pluto, makes a conjunction to Mars. And I'm thinking particularly about the conjunction between Mars and Uranus. I mean, I think that that really brings things back into focus. So this Mars-Uranus conjunction, which was around was exact about a week ago, does come back. As I was telling Aries, it's like a fire that you thought had gone out, you thought you could leave it alone, and then it sort of rekindles. It's kind of, reminds me of 1976. Yeah, I mean, everyone talks about the summer of 1976 in the UK, and I was 14 in 1976, and I remember in the garden where I was, there was a bamboo forest, and it was very dry that summer, and I was playing with matches. I think I was making fires, which is not a good thing to do, and the bamboos caught fire, and that really is bad when bamboos catch fire. A dry clump of bamboos catching fire, it just made this incredible noise. And my mother had to call the fire brigade, and I was just so embarrassed, and I just sort of ran away and watched from a distance with the fire brigade coming to sort this fire out. And I didn't really get into trouble. I didn't get criticised, which was kind of amazing. But I felt very embarrassed about it. But the point is that it gives you an idea of something rekindling. Coming back into focus. You thought it had gone. When certainly in 1976, when you had a very dry summer, not as dry as now, but God, it was a long time ago, wasn't it? 1976. That was 1976. That was 50 years ago. Yeah, but it kind of. That memory is very clear and very terrifying. In fact, it was could have been 50 years ago today almost when that fire happened. I wasn't keeping a diary, but things might rekindle, and so you have to you have to watch out. Maybe you want things to rekindle. I mean, Geminis do get bored sometimes, and when Geminis are bored, they might take a few risks. Yeah, you might want to stir things up. There might be something that you want to talk about, all over again, and it might be quite controversial. And if you want to cause an argument, if you want to cause trouble, you certainly can, and you can do it in really quite an effective way. I think you really can be effective, and you know how to do things in such a way that gets people's attention. And I think that many Geminis are going to have a certain attractiveness to them. Maybe not me, but other Geminis are going to have an attractiveness that you might want to cultivate. And it could be Gemini that if you want to give the impression this weekend of being quite dynamic, I think that's what people want, what some people want. Now, it might be just too much. It could well be too much, but if you want to be the centre of things, the one who initiates, then Gemini, I think that is something you very much can do. Particularly on Saturday, when there are a load of aspects. When that Moon Mars Uranus configuration is really active, and whatever you say, whatever you do, I think there's a good chance it will get attention, and it might be a situation where some people really appreciate what you're doing, but other people aren't quite so sure. And in this light, we've got a square aspect forming between Venus and Uranus. So Venus, of course, has moved into Virgo, but it is starting to aspect. It is. Well, it's starting to aspect Mars as well. But that Venus-Uranus square could be about what you are doing, what you would like to do. Uranus is now, of course, in Gemini, and it stays in Gemini for some time. But Uranus is activated, by the Moon, and Venus is starting to square Uranus. So the things you do might well have an impact on other people. Now, in many cases, as I've said, you have a charm to you, you have an attractiveness, and people are going to like what you do, at the very least because it's interesting. But not everyone is going to be appreciative. And it just might be that privately, some people have their doubts about what you are doing and what you're saying. So, Gemini, if possible, try to understand the environment, the social environment, the interpersonal environment, and get a feeling for what you can do, what you can't do, and where the limits are. Because if you do take things too far, you might not be aware that you've taken things too far, and at the same time, you have been observed, you have been noticed. So you're not being ignored. I mean, it's good that you're not being ignored in some respects, but if you get too much attention, well, it can be a problem if you are perhaps causing just a little bit too much confusion, a little bit too much sort of upset. But as Saturday changes to Sunday, I do think, Gemini, that things do calm down, and at the end of the weekend, as the Moon moves out of Gemini into Cancer, I think that you'll be able to sort of be more relaxed, and as you move into next week, I think that there'll be other things to think about, and you won't be quite so much at the centre of things, and maybe that will be a bit of a relief. Cancer. Moon is moving through Gemini pretty much the whole weekend. Okay, it does move into Cancer, right at the end of a weekend. If you're in the UK, that would be 11:46 p.m. on Sunday. In other words, right at the end. If you're in the Americas, late afternoon, early evening on Sunday, the moon moves into Cancer. But yeah, while the moon is in Gemini, I think that Cancer, your preference is probably going to be to really not really be in the centre of things. I mean, the centre of things could be dangerous. I mean, and I know that I've just been talking to Gemini, and Gemini may well find itself to be in the centre of things, and Gemini might in fact enjoy being in the centre of things. But Cancer, I think in some respects you want a quiet life, and you can feel that. You can feel that things are changing. From a perspective of a lunar cycle, we are right at the end of the lunar cycle. We've got a new moon coming up. At the beginning of next week, and when is that? I think that's on the 14th. In fact, I think it's on Tuesday, isn't it? Is that Tuesday or? Yeah, so it's pretty soon, this new moon, but we're not there yet. And while the moon is in Gemini and the sun is in Cancer, you kind of feel that it's the end of something, and you don't want to make any more commitments. You don't want to start things. It's just best to let things run their course. But even if you try to keep a distance, you might still find that there are things that do bother you. I mean, the moon on Saturday is making a conjunction to Mars. It makes a conjunction to Uranus, and those two conjunctions on Saturday, yeah, they could be annoying. They could stir things up, and however hard you try to keep yourself to yourself, there are just things going on that basically can't be ignored, that you get worked up about. So the question is, what do you do about it? If something is going on and you don't want to get involved, I mean, in a way that could just make things more difficult, because once something is happening, well, you can't avoid it. It's there, and it might be best on Saturday that you are sort of more interactive. You don't want to do something, but if you make the effort to find out what is going on, and you're ready to be quite tough and to express your feelings, even express your irritation, then that might be quite effective. Moon conjunct Mars, I mean, that is an aspect that can stir the average Cancerian up, even if it is in Gemini, and you decide to be very clear. You don't allow your irritation, your anger to build up. You instead you make it clear the moment you start to feel it, and that means you can avoid an explosive situation. Now, that looks at things in terms of a conflict, but it might also be the case, Cancer, that you want to do things on your own, in your own way, in a way that might be quite secluded. And so in terms of your own activity and your propensity for action, I mean, I don't think that you want to take action in company. Not really. I don't think that you're going to enjoy spending huge amounts of time with other people. But, on your own, in a setting that you have complete control over, that might be a different situation. You might want to put huge amounts of energy into something which, is personal to you. You don't want to discuss it. You don't want to show off about it. You don't want to advertise what you're doing. But you can quietly do something, of real value, and it might be that you can, throw a lot of energy into something in a very short period of time, and it might be just a few hours, maybe a few hours on Saturday, where you can really do something that, in its own way is quite spectacular, and no one knows about it, but you've still done it. And it's out of the way, and you can move on to the next challenge. Now, at some stage, the moon will move into Cancer. So if you're in the Americas, the moon will go into Cancer on Sunday, late afternoon, early evening. And yet that does create, a real change. When the moon goes into Cancer, you feel sort of more yourself. You can see the possibility for, being perhaps more open, being more at one with your environment, and you're starting to prepare for the new moon. You can see that a new beginning is at hand, and so that might be just something that you want to start aligning yourself to, but broad picture, Cancer is really, the less engagement, the better. But the moment you feel agitated and you feel that people are annoying you, or there's some situation that needs your attention, you might not have a choice. But keep it brief, and I think you're going to be very good at just very focused energetics, putting a lot of energy into something very quickly. You do the job, and then you disappear, and if you want to spend most of the weekend in seclusion, isn't that what weekends are for? Then I think that you can. Leo. There is a lot of stuff in Gemini this weekend, and with that stuff in Gemini, Leo, you're probably going to be fairly friendly. I think that if you get the chance, you can be with people, and I think that you'll enjoy a certain amount of variety with the moon in Gemini. You might be bored if you have to spend all weekend with the same group of people, and so if you can mix from sort of one group of people to another, enjoy the company of different people, I think that you can be quite effective, and you'll give the impression of being not just sociable but also quite exciting, and so that does look pretty good. But Leo, that everything has its limits. You can't be right in the middle of things forever, and perhaps you should be focusing your energies on Saturday, rather than Sunday, because on Saturday we've got a Moon-Mars conjunction. In fact, we've got a Moon-Uranus conjunction. So on Saturday, there is a lot of action, and you can perhaps go to different places. You can, as I said, you can meet with different people, and things just might happen that you weren't necessarily expecting. And one reason for that is that we have got a semi-square between the Sun and Uranus. So that semi-square between the Sun and Uranus, I talked about that semi-square in the introduction to this video, and that Sun Uranus semi-square. I think it is potentially a big deal, and yeah, it could be exciting. It could provide you with new things to amuse you. Yeah, new people to amuse you. But there is a downside to that Sun square Uranus. As I said at the introduction, it could be quite violent and unpredictable. Semisquares are an important aspect, particularly when they're exact. So you could say that there is you minding your own business when just something happens, something that you hadn't fully expected. Now, it could relate to other people, what other people are doing, what other people are saying. So although you are, I think, quite sociable this weekend, particularly at the beginning of the weekend, sociability always has a risk, because you can't predict what people are going to do, or indeed what people are not going to do. People can just not show up. People can be a law unto themselves. And so if you do spend a lot of time with other people, just things might happen that you hadn't fully imagined. And okay, it could be on a psychological level. Now that is absolutely possible. You might have some kind of revelation about what is important to you, what really matters, beyond your short-term ambitions. Yes, you have your short-term ambitions. There are things you want tomorrow, next week, even next year. But what about the broader picture? This is a theme at the moment. With Uranus moving through Gemini, it is encouraging you, Leo, to think beyond the immediate situation, to think about the kind of life that you would really like to be living. And there might be some surprises. You might just realize that what you thought was the goal, what you thought was the ideal, is not quite what you were looking for. That actually you were looking for something else, and that short-term ambitions, they're kind of losing their shine because of this something else, something grander, something more meaningful, more in tune with who you are. And that might be how the Sun semi-square Uranus works at the absolute highest level. But but it could just also be about sort of day-to-day, instability and just things happening that you hadn't planned for. And people can, to a certain extent, be a law unto themselves. Now, I do think that, Leo, that the emphasis this weekend is on Saturday. I think there's a lot more going on Saturday than on Sunday. On Sunday, I think that things will start to calm down, and down as the moon sort of moves into the last part of Gemini, indeed, as it starts to move into Cancer. So, if you're in the UK, for example, just before midnight, the moon will move into Cancer. If you're in the Americas on Sunday, late afternoon, early evening, the moon goes into Cancer. And so when the moon moves into Cancer, that is, that's a run up to the new moon, because you've got a new moon at the beginning of a week, a day or two's time, and that new moon is for you. Well, I'll be talking about that new moon when the time comes, but that new moon is perhaps more reflective, and you're picking up on that new moon energy, and you feel that by the end of a weekend that you do need your distance, and so that it's probably a good thing, and you need a time to prepare. And the sun is now just about to move into the last decade of Cancer. Well, that means in 10 days' time, the in 10 days' time, the Sun will be in Leo. In fact, that decadent change, if you look at the Sun, it's at 1951 midnight New York time in New York. So by Sunday, when the Sun moves from the central to the last decade of Cancer, you might indeed experience a change, and I think that, as I've already indicated, it might just be about slowing down and realizing that you don't have to do everything at once. Virgo, there is something about you at the moment that that is quite appealing. You're a hard person to ignore, and maybe that's to do with the fact that Venus is now in Virgo. It's in your sign, and so with Venus in your sign, that just really means that you come over as being quite an attractive and engaged person, and when you're with people, you can really present yourself in the best possible light. And of course, we know with Venus in Virgo, that may say something about what you look like. You might make changes to the way you come over. Maybe your sense of detail is going to be stronger than usual, and you might think that if you're going to be out and about, you've got to adopt a particular look, a particular style, and I think you'll be very good at it. I mean, Virgo as a sign does have a good sense of detail, and with Venus now in Virgo, I think that that does look pretty good, and I think that your attractiveness really is emphasized this weekend. So don't feel that you're going to be ignored. And I know that Virgo can sometimes be quite modest and understated, and you don't want to make a fuss, but not this weekend. Provided you stay in control. And it is important to stay in control, because if you are doing a lot of stuff over the weekend, especially on Saturday, things could happen. And what we have, as well as Venus moving into Virgo, we've got a conjunction involving Moon, Mars, Uranus on Saturday. Having Moon, Mars, Uranus in the same sign in the first half of Gemini. Well, it's certainly an exciting set of aspects. It allows you to really be yourself. In fact, Virgo, you can be a larger than life person. It really is possible. So Virgo, don't be modest. That is another good reason not to be modest. You can have an impact. And additionally, Virgo, if you have any ambitions, things that you really want to get together, you want to make connections, make sure that you are heard, then now might be your opportunity. And in the process, you might cause a few surprises, but maybe that's the right thing to be doing. Because with Moon making a conjunction to Uranus, that's just is another reminder that Uranus is in Gemini. It stays in Gemini for the next few years, and this is a time for Virgos to really stand out. And so what you're doing today, Saturday, could be of the nature of a fractal. Have I got that right? So a fractal is like it's like something in something very small, which is a representative of something much larger. It's like one of the the Mandelbrot set. When you can look at a very small part of a picture, and it will be the same as the larger part of a picture. So what's happening on Saturday? It could, in some respects, be a microcosm of the whole period from between now and 2032. And if that is the case, then that really suggests that you need to really up the pace. Do something of value. While you have the opportunity. I mean, you will of course have the opportunity for the next 6 years until 2032. But with Moon, Mars, and Uranus together, that might be a chance to take this energy, an energy which, could be quite unstable, quite even dangerous. But you can use this energy and harness it, and focus it on the things you want. And so perhaps it's a day, Virgo, when it's okay to put your own interests and your own individuality first. Even though I've mentioned Venus conjunct the South Node. I've said that you don't want to be too selfish. You don't want to just put yourself first at the expense of other people. But maybe there is a time, Virgo, for sort of having an impact. And if that time is any time, well, maybe it's now. But I must emphasize that Saturday really is the day when it is all happening. I think that Sunday, things are potentially calming down. I mean, there's still a lot you can do, a lot you can accomplish on Sunday, but it won't quite have the intensity of Saturday. Libra, you're not necessarily, in the mood for massive activity, because you feel that you value your own space, and in some respects, you're of the view that things have their limitation. Other people have their limitations. They can make claims. They can, on the surface, appear to be very exciting, and there's a lot on offer. But do you really want to be bothered? And I think that this feeling that you don't want to be bothered perhaps has got stronger over the last day or two. Ever since Venus moved into Virgo. Venus is of course your ruler, and with Venus in Virgo, part of you, Libra, feels that you don't want to take risks, you don't want sort of complications, and you just want things to be more straightforward. And if you want things to be straightforward, the last thing you want to do is just get involved, with other people and their chaos and their mess, and so that might be your sort of overview, your general view as you move into the weekend, and it's true that on Saturday we've got a conjunction between Mars and Uranus, and this Mars-Uranus conjunction, we've had a Mars-Uranus conjunction for the last week. In fact, the Mars-Uranus conjunction is separating. You can see that it's 5 degrees apart. But the thing is, the Moon is making a conjunction to Uranus, and it's making a conjunction to Mars, and that could stir things up. It may say something about how another person behaves. Moon-Mars conjunction. Someone does something or says something that you might not like the sound of, and you might well want to sort of back off. That is a very good reason to keep yourself to yourself. On the other hand, Uranus is in Gemini, and perhaps you're still getting used to Uranus in Gemini. But one way in which Uranus in Gemini could work, not just now, but over the next 6 years, is that Uranus in Gemini could stir things up in terms of your beliefs and your ideas. You thought you'd sorted it all out. You thought you had got a position, whether it's a religious or a spiritual position, maybe a political position, ideological position. Libra is a very political sign. Don't forget that. A lot of Librans get drawn into politics. In the UK, you think of Margaret Thatcher, David Cameron outside. You've got outside of that, you've got Putin, Berlusconi. He's still. Of course, I know Berlusconi's dead, but he had quite an impression. When he was at the peak of Italian politics. Librans can be political animals, and having an idea about how things should be run can be part of a Libran experience. But with Uranus in Gemini, things could be being just shaken up, and you might see things which confront some of your widely held opinions. It might be that you kind of get confused by clustering. By clustering, I'm kind of referring to this strange thing in politics, whereby certain opinions, come to move together. For example, someone who supports the death penalty is very often against abortion, and in the American context would be supportive of gun rights, and might also be supportive of property owner rights, and could believe they can do what they like to the environment. But if they've got trees on their property, they should be able to do what they like with them. So, but there are other clusters of political opinions which are more on the progressive side. But these political opinions, this clustering, is kind of sometimes a little bit of a bit illogical. If someone supports a death penalty, why should they be opposed to abortion? It doesn't necessarily make logical sense. If you're a Catholic, it might be different, but there are these different political views which do cluster together. Certainly in the United States, but I think in other parts of the world, and it might be in terms of your own views that with Uranus moving into Gemini, as Uranus continues moving into Gemini through the next 6 years, those views might be changing. But it might not be about politics. It could be spiritual views, philosophical and ethical views. And with the Moon conjuncting Uranus, conjuncting Mars, that Uranus energy is kind of focused on particularly on Saturday. And so there might be things happening, things people say, things you observe, Libra, which kind of do shake you up a little. You're not quite so sure. And that is the problem about going out into the world, interacting with people, interacting with society. It's not that it's necessarily dangerous. It could raise questions. And maybe these are questions you don't want to necessarily ask yourself, and so it could well be quite a thought-provoking weekend. But additionally, other people may not be especially relaxing, particularly with the Moon making that conjunction to Mars and that conjunction to Uranus. You'd like people to be easygoing. You'd like to perhaps be able to hang out with people you trust and not have to worry about too much. But it might not happen like that. So every time you mix with someone, you meet someone, there's always that sort of element of risk, especially on Saturday. I mean, on Sunday, things do change. I mean, the moon has made all its big aspects, and it moves through the last part of Gemini, and I think that you can perhaps be calmer, and you can be more thoughtful, and then the moon moves into Cancer. Well, okay, the moon moves into Cancer late afternoon, early evening if you're in the Americas, and so when the moon moves into Cancer, that is a change. It means we do have a run up to the new moon. If you're not in the Americas, then it's kind of more about tomorrow that the moon moves into Cancer. I think that in the UK it moves into Cancer 14 minutes to midnight, very late on Sunday. But when the moon moves into Cancer, your priorities start to change. You start preparing for the new moon, and I think this new moon is important for you, Libra. We'll be talking about that in a couple of videos' time, and this new moon may say something about where you want to go, how you are defining your ambitions, and so that's perhaps something you want to start preparing for, as the weekend draws to a close. Scorpio. The Mars-Uranus conjunction should have been done and dusted by now. I mean, I've stopped talking about it for the last day or two, and we've kind of moved on to other things. And, of course, this Mars-Uranus conjunction, Scorpio, I did think that it was important for you because, of course, Mars is your ruler. But the moon is rekindling it. And, an image I've sort of used with the moon making a conjunction to Mars, conjunction to Uranus, is, like a fire which we thought was extinguished, but actually it's smouldering away, and the moon comes along, hits that Mars and Uranus. It's like a sort of a gust of wind, particularly in an air sign in Gemini. It's a gust of wind that it stirs it all up again. And that might be something you experience on Saturday, something you thought was gone, something you thought you could stop worrying about, maybe even stop getting angry about, but it just all comes together again. And it's not going to last forever. The moon is a fast-moving planet, and if you can sort of contain the fire, then you'll be okay. And okay, I'm exaggerating here, but it may say something about you, something that you suddenly get angry about, almost from nowhere, and you go through with it. And I'm not saying that you necessarily have to actually do anything. It may be something that you just experience in your own way, in your own world. And I think for most of the weekend, the Scorpios are going to want to be Scorpios. By that I mean you're going to want to be a Scorpio because you're just going to want to just not put yourself out too much. Maybe even you want to hide. You want to find somewhere where you feel safe, and not take risks, and because it's a dangerous world out there. I mean, for sure. But with Mars, with Moon, Mars, Uranus coming together, just hiding may not entirely be an option, and it could be that you have to reveal yourself, perhaps even sort of reveal your power. Yeah, not something you necessarily want to do, but it just might feel that you have to. And when you look at what you are trying to do, what you are trying to achieve, I think, Scorpio, you're perhaps going to take the view that things are difficult. It's not easy to get results. That something is just being a real block. It could be another person is being a block, or it just is a situation that is not going to change. And yeah, what do you do about it? You can talk, you can persuade, but it's still difficult, and you may reach the conclusion that the only way to get through the situation is to use massive force, maybe the full force of your personality to really get your way. Now, it's possible that with a supreme effort, particularly on Saturday, you really can you can have quite a powerful impact. But you don't want to take things too far. I think that if you're not careful, the whole thing could be rather exhausting. So you need to have a fairly accurate idea, what you can do, what you can't do, and use your powers of scorpionic self-preservation, which are strong at the moment, and you can do what is necessary to protect yourself and to make sure you're not exhausted, to make sure that you've got enough energy for the next day, and that you slowly you conserve your energy, and remember also, Scorpio, that the lunar cycle is coming to an end. We've got a new moon coming up. I think is it July the 14th? And I think it's July the 14th. So yeah, we've got a new moon on July the 14th. And that is perhaps for you, well, in fact for all of us, it's a new beginning, and I think it's something that we should be looking forward to. So yeah, this new moon is it's on the 14th. So between now and the 14th, it just could be a time for preparation. And on Sunday the moon is moving through very late Gemini, so the moon finishes making its conjunctions to Mars and Uranus. So by Sunday I do think that things are calming down. And then at the end of Sunday and into Monday, the moon is changing sign. It's moving into Cancer, and Cancer is a sign that that has a natural sympathy with your sign, Scorpio. So if you're feeling tense at the beginning of a weekend, then I think that as you move into the new week, I just think that you'll be feeling better and more relaxed, and then you can start to think about the new moon and the opportunities that the new moon will bring. Because I think that this new moon really should work for you and will allow you to see things and be aware of maybe aware of connections that perhaps in the recent past you just hadn't seen. So it could be a dramatic weekend, especially on Saturday, but don't make it overly dramatic, and make sure you look after yourself, and don't exhaust yourself, because you might feel obliged, you want to get involved in sort of titanic struggles, but I don't think it's really necessary. Sagittarius, emphasis on Gemini. A lot of stuff in Gemini. I mean, Moon, Mars, Uranus, and Gemini is your opposite sign. You've been getting used to Uranus in Gemini, and Uranus in Gemini stays in Gemini for a long time, stays there for years, and that might well say something about other people, about how relationships work, and you may be observing things in a new way. You're watching how people behave, what they're doing, what they're interested in, and it might not always be to your liking, and having to deal with other people's individual personalities can be quite exhausting. And now that you've got Moon, Mars, and Moon making a conjunction to Mars and Uranus, that the Moon is kind of bringing Mars-Uranus back together again. It's putting it back into focus. So, you had Mars-Uranus conjunction, a week ago in your opposite sign, and that may well have said something about relationships or about how you related to the outside world, and you perhaps came to the conclusion that you didn't really have quite as much control as you would like to, and now the moon just brings it back into focus, short, for in quite a short period of time. So, on Saturday, while the moon is making a conjunction, there may be a few experiences of a social nature which are sometimes difficult to deal with, or they could just give you, pause for thought. And so, don't exaggerate. Perhaps it just might be a case of just letting people do their own thing, within reason. You don't want to be in a situation where people are doing something which is dangerous, or it involves huge amounts of risk. Then you have to do something. But in most cases, just let people be. Let people be as individualistic as they like. Let the world go its merry way, and don't necessarily feel that you always have to be involved. In fact, I think Sagittarius, you're going to be possibly on best form when you are just doing nothing, or when you are sort of just almost semi-conscious. Okay, I mean, I don't want to indicate you just want to spend the whole weekend asleep, but your unconscious is available to you right now. There are things that you are picking up, and you're picking up things about the world around you and the people around you, and that's another good reason just to observe and not feel that you have to take anything too seriously. But nonetheless, Venus is still moving. Venus has just moved into Virgo, and that is a big change. And okay, my video yesterday, I was talking about Venus conjunct, not just Venus in Virgo, but Venus conjunct the South Node. And with Venus conjunct the South Node, I was indicating that it might say something about your ambitions and how you want to proceed. And I think with Venus moving through Virgo, it's not just about what you want to do, but it's also creating the right environment. And I think that you're going to be quite able to present yourself very well, and I think you're going to have a concept of appearance. I mean, or rather, a concept of how you appear. And even though it's a weekend, it's a weekend where you kind of don't really want to be involved in much at some level. If you make the effort, to be friendly and to make connections where possible, without forcing it, then I think in your own way you can be quite effective. Now, you might feel that circumstances are against you. You might feel that if you were to try to make an impression, that just things would just get too complicated too quickly, and it just might not be something you want to get involved with. But no, I think that if you do keep sort of pushing yourself forward in a gentle way, I think that you can make an impression, and just don't get too sort of worked up by what other people are doing. That moon conjunct Mars and Uranus, that does say something about other people's behaviour, and it's just something that you have to take into account. Now, one aspect we have, which is a bit kind of odd, well, I mean, it's a kind of odds with what else is going on in the weekend, is a semisextile between Venus and Jupiter. So, Jupiter is in early Leo, Venus is in early Virgo. So we've got the two benefics, these fortunate planets, which are making a 30-degree aspect to one another. And so, one of those planets is, of course, Jupiter, which is, your ruler in Leo. It's quite an expansive placement for Jupiter. I'm very optimistic overall about Jupiter moving into Leo for you, Sagittarius, and you've got over a year of Jupiter being in this position. But Jupiter being at odds with Venus in Virgo, it might be the difference between the sacred and the profane. With Jupiter being the sacred and Venus being the profane. So, what does profane mean? I believe profane means things that are outside the temple, things that are not sacred. And it's perhaps asking you, what is really important to you? From a spiritual and moral perspective, there are things that really matter, things that you should be really aspiring to, not just now, but, over the next year and more while Jupiter moves through Leo. But then you come across, Venus in Virgo, and Venus in Virgo, at least compared to Jupiter in Leo, might be the lower path, just being caught by things that are not important, abase, are ephemeral. When I say ephemeral, I mean things that are just not going to last forever, just temporary irritations, the material side of things, appearances for the sake of it. Yeah, people wanting to look good, but who cares what people look like when you're thinking about eternity? And so there is that distinction there if we look at things from a perspective of Jupiter. Now, we could also look at things from a perspective of Venus. So there is Venus in Virgo trying to make sense of things in a material way. And then Jupiter is kind of an irritation. And so perhaps from Venus in Virgo's perspective, it's saying, well, you can't just be endlessly spiritual, just constantly thinking about broadening your horizons. You do have to think about reality to some extent, material reality, and the fact that like it or not, we have to live our lives. We have to make some effort to be successful up to a point, because success is not just about success; it's about money, and it's making sure the books balance and so forth. So this Venus semisextile Jupiter, it's quite an important aspect. It's easy to neglect, but I think that it does matter, and so it's something that you might want to reflect on over the course of the weekend. Capricorn. You want things to be done properly as far as is possible. And it might not be entirely easy. Perhaps your own standards are going to be quite high. And if something just isn't right, you're going to notice pretty quickly. And the question, Capricorn, might be, how good does something actually have to be? Maybe it doesn't have to be that good. It certainly doesn't have to be perfect. But in this quest to do things well, maybe to make them perfect, as perfect as is possible, that might cause a certain amount of irritation. I mean, after all, we do have a conjunction between the Moon and Mars. In fact, we've got a conjunction between Moon and Uranus on Saturday. And when we think about Mars, don't forget Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Therefore, there is a certain link between Mars and this sign, because signs are, I don't know, as I say, I think you can regard Mars as being a sort of, at least an honorary ruler of Capricorn. So with Moon, Mars, Uranus together, that could stir things up and might make you feel that you've just got to just really look into things and keep looking and keep turning things over. That could be the nature of Gemini. I mean, Gemini can be a sign that just doesn't stop, and it keeps thinking, keeps analysing. Is this good enough? What if this were to go wrong? Could you do a better job? So it can be a little bit circular, and at a certain point, Capricorn, I think you need to know when to stop, to be able to to tell yourself that, this is good enough, and you don't have to do any more work on things that you've done your best. And additionally, with the Mars Uranus conjunction, okay, because we had this Mars Uranus conjunction, it was a week ago or something that the conjunction was exact. But the thing is, the moon has stirred it all up, and at its worst, it could be like making a mistake. You make a small mistake, and it might be quite physical. Maybe you could do yourself an injury. Be careful with animals. So if you have animals, particularly young animals, animals that are not properly trained, then you could say that we've got a signature here, Capricorn, for example, a dog bite. Not necessarily anything serious, but you could just find, I don't know, blood could be drawn if you're playing around with animals. I don't know what you're doing over the weekend, but if you don't have animals, I don't think that's such a problem. But but it just could be something you are doing, not necessarily connected with animals, that just leads to a small injury because you're not paying attention. So Capricorn, think about how something could go wrong. Whether it's through animals, doing something with a knife, with kitchens, some kind of appliance, just something that could potentially cause some damage. Again, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm sure it probably won't happen, but I'm just trying to look at the the astrological symbolism to consider how it might all work out. So yeah, it's possible that the weekend certainly has an annoying side to it, especially on Saturday. But at the same time, I think that your ability to get on with people is reasonably good. I think you know how to behave, you know what to say. I think that you have the capacity to put people at their ease, even if they are not putting you at your ease. So that might sound a bit unfair, but you're trying your best. Other people may at times be a little bit unwieldy, particularly on Saturday when you've got that Moon-Mars conjunction. But maybe a bit of toleration on your part, would go a long way. Aquarius. The moon is in Gemini, an air sign, and it stays in Gemini pretty much all the weekend. And so, all things being equal, having the moon in Gemini, if you're an Aquarius, is pretty good. I think you're feeling quite positive about yourself, what you can do, what you can achieve, and I think that you can create things of real value. But the moon does make conjunctions to Mars and Uranus, and I've been looking at this conjunction between the Mars and Uranus through the 12 signs, and I've basically been saying that this conjunction is more about the beginning of a weekend. I don't think it's a feature of the late weekend. As you move into Sunday, this conjunction has largely lost its power. But I've been at times a little bit negative about Moon, Mars, Uranus making this conjunction, because it is potentially rather accident prone, and it can be about arguments and disagreements. But there is a positive side to it, and I think you, Aquarius, are in a position to really make the most of this conjunction, provided you use it properly. Mars is about energy; it's where you are putting your energy, and it's in Gemini, a fortunate sign. It's conjunct Uranus, a planet that I think you have a good relationship with. And so, right now you have the possibility of doing something of, real value, something that is, very unique to you. So, if you want to be outstanding, do you want to do something that is original? I mean, it might be slightly disturbing to some people. I mean, that is Mars Uranus. I mean, it's not an easygoing aspect, but something that really stands out, that is unique, in your own way. Then I think that is very much something you can do, and it's certainly not a time, Aquarius, to be thinking about popularity. What do other people want? You don't want to just be a complete individual, because then you might not be popular. People might not understand. No, these are not things you should be worrying about. You need to do what feels right to you, without reference to society, without reference to the norms of the outside world. Okay, short term, maybe you won't be recognized, but in the end, I think that everyone will realize that you've done something of high quality, and most importantly, it is an essential expression of who you are. So that does look pretty good. So I think that the weekend can be quite powerful and quite inventive. Now, by the end of a weekend, the moon does change sign. It moves from Gemini into Cancer. Well, certainly if you're in the Americas, late afternoon, early evening in the Americas, the moon moves from Gemini into Cancer. Okay, that won't be until tomorrow for most other places. But as the moon moves from Gemini into Cancer, as you move into the new week, things do settle down. Perhaps you have kind of lost your opportunity, or lost your desire to be wonderfully unique and original, or perhaps you recognize that it's okay being unique, but you also need some kind of structure. You can't just be original for the sake of it. You have to create some order. You have to make sure that you're able to see things through, in the real world. So things do calm down, at the end of a weekend, and I think that there's less pressure to do something spectacular. And then, of course, it's a run up to the new moon, and that new moon takes place. When does it take place? I think it's on Tuesday. We've got the new moon, and that new moon does present its own challenges. And I mean, I'll be talking about the new moon in the next couple of days. But I think that it is a time when you have to take what you've done, take what you've achieved, and put it into a wider context, and make sure that all the details are sorted out. You do the plan, you have the idea, but you've got to make sure that it can last, and that might be the challenge that the new moon brings. Pisces. There is quite a lot going on, Pisces, especially on Saturday. In fact, sort of particularly on Saturday. So what we have is, we have the moon in Gemini, and it makes a load of aspects, makes a sextile to Jupiter, and then Jupiter is of course your ruler. Then it makes conjunction to Uranus, sextile Neptune, trine Pluto, then conjunction to Mars. So the aspect that is perhaps of particular importance, or the two aspects that are of particular importance, are the conjunction between the Moon and Mars, and between the Moon and Uranus. So it's taking place in Gemini, which is a sign which is important. It's a very fundamental sign in the Pisces chart. It represents the basis of who you are. It represents your sort of grounding. And so with Moon, Mars and Uranus coming together, it might seem a little bit unsettling. Things may not be quite as stable as you would like them to be. Even if you try your very hardest to keep things on an even keel. So, if you're at home on Saturday, minding your own business, things might still be going on. Things around the house that you expected to be in order, and they're not in order. Things might not work, or there may be people around you that want your attention, or maybe demanding your attention, or they might be behaving in ways that are somewhat sort of unexpected. And there's also a psychological dimension here. It might be about what you are thinking about, and you might have certain realizations that things could be better. And Uranus moved into Gemini quite recently. So what's happening is that the moon, when it moves into Gemini, makes that conjunction to Uranus. It's just it's stirring things up. It's letting you see a process. And part of the process of Uranus moving through Gemini between now and the next 6 years is about you reevaluating what is important to you, reevaluating even the foundations of your existence, which of course relates to the past as well. So there could be things going on Saturday which really do give you pause for thought, and they might be surprising, they might even be shocking, but whatever they are, I think they're for the good. It's good to realize that things aren't as they should be, and that things could be better. Now, all of this is quite compact. So Saturday we get all of these aspects which I've been referring to. In fact, we've got the moon. I should also say the moon is making a square to the north node and the south node. I mean, Uranus is conjunct the north node and the south node as well. So that indicates that some of these surprises, some of these realizations may relate to the question of where exactly is it all heading? Where would you like it to go? And what choices do you have to make? But anyway, it is all quite compact. And on Sunday, the moon is still in Gemini for most of the day, but it's not making any aspects, and so things might start to calm down. And then the moon moves into late Gemini, and then it starts to move into Cancer. Late afternoon, early evening in the Americas. On Sunday, the moon is changing sign. The moon moves out of Gemini, moves into Cancer in the UK, I think at 14 minutes to midnight on Sunday, and then tomorrow the moon moves into Cancer, and we get the run up to the new moon, and so that does create a change. And I think when the moon does move into Cancer, whenever that is, I think that probably is going to be a bit of a relief. I mean, Cancer is a water sign. You're feeling better about yourself, and you perhaps feel that there are more things you can do, but less pressure. But still, it's the end of a lunar cycle, and you're not really going to be able to do anything particularly dramatic until I think after the new moon. So we've got the new moon on Tuesday, and I think for you, Pisces, that is going to be a pretty good new moon, as I'll be discussing in a day or two's time. And that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now it's time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 21, which is biting through. Now, the important point about biting through, before I describe what it actually means, is that we have no moving lines. And because we have no moving lines, this may say something about the weekend, because this is the book of changes, the I Ching. It's about how one thing changes to another. Now, if we have got no moving lines, this might indicate that things actually could be quite static. There may not be much in the way of action. Now, if you have been listening to the astrology section of this chart, of this video, the astrology section, you will have noticed that I've gone on and on and on about the Moon-Mars-Uranus conjunction and how destabilising it could be, especially on Saturday. But this hexagram kind of contradicts it, because not everything in astrology works. And it may well be that in spite of the Moon, Mars and Uranus making this conjunction, there might not be much going on. And so that might be a bit of a relief. But this hexagram biting through is about punishment. Can be about punishment. It's about it might be about being critical as well. So who's getting punished and why are people being punished? Well, we're biting through. We're dealing with unstable elements. We're dealing with people who are doing things their way, people who are also getting things wrong. And biting through is about disciplining them, telling them that this is no good. This has to change. Now, the biting through in terms of the I Ching and ancient China is talking about real punishments. You're putting people in stocks. Of course, in China, they have all sorts of... In ancient China, they'd have all sorts of horrific punishments. But what we're talking about here is perhaps how we relate to other people and how we behave if other people are not behaving. And, this might go back to the Moon-Mars-Uranus conjunction that we've got on Saturday. Moon-Mars-Uranus conjunction is quite an unstable aspect, and it may be talking about other people's behaviour, people perhaps behaving in a bad way or an inconsiderate way. It's an unstable influence. It could be, of course, us behaving in an inconsiderate way. And so the biting through is, what do we do about it? How do we respond to the situation? And, well, there is perhaps not much to be said because there are no moving lines. But with no moving lines, it's not like we have to take dramatic action. In fact, we should be quite calm, and we don't want to get heavily involved. And of course, with punishment, there is always this friction between being tough. You need to administer a tough punishment, make sure someone never does that again. But then that might create bad attitude. Maybe there's a place for leniency, and so we need to get the balance right. We must not get emotionally involved in what other people are doing wrong. So if someone has offended us or they've been behaving in a way that is self-destructive, how do we intervene? We certainly don't intervene with anger. That's not going to get anywhere, particularly with Moon making that conjunction to Mars and Uranus. That's not the approach. We need to just show some distance and objectivity the whole way we present something. So I think that if you are in a position where you feel you need to be critical of another person, don't do it in a way that is angry, because I think that's going to be counterproductive. You do it in a way that is almost kind of a bit neutral. You might want to advise someone, well, yeah, you could do it like that, but there may be a better approach. And so if you can keep your distance, even when you're in a situation which seems very provocative, where someone is behaving quite badly, a slightly distracted approach, not distracted, but detached approach might be ideal, because it's not a time to get overly emotional and to be overly critical and to court arguments and to court resistance. Some people may be suffering from, what do they call it, ODD, ODD, what's that? Being defiant for the sake of it. And so if you're overly critical and you get annoyed about something, you're going to get annoyance back, you're going to get defiance back, and that's absolutely what you need, and it is unnecessary. And to get an idea about what this hexagram is about, one can look at the nuclear hexagram. Now, the nuclear hexagram is not the hexagram itself. It's just talking about the background. And, the nuclear hexagram, if we knock off the top and bottom lines and we just look at we expand the 4 lines in the middle. So we get the bottom line would be that trigram here, which is sort of about stillness, and the top trigram would be about the abyss. So if we look at that central nuclear hexagram, it's obstruction, and that's just talking about the overall background. And the background to this hexagram is just things are just not moving. Perhaps people are being obstructive. Things are just being made difficult, but what we have to do is bite through, but just be as detached as possible. And that's it. That's all I want to say in this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.